When we're young, we have all the confidence in the world. We're not afraid to be loud, we're not afraid of saying what's on our mind, and we're never afraid of how we act. But some point in our lives, that one comment comes to us, and we start feeling insecure about how we look, about how we think, about how we behave. And for some reason in one part of our lives, we start thinking that it's wrong to be different. But every person was born into this world to shine, to be their unique selves, because quite frankly, it's boring being like other people. And that's what the Canucks Autism Network realizes, that there are these youth on the autism spectrum that were also born to shine, and these families need the support to allow their kids to shine. And that's why myself, my colleagues Andrea and Jules were so excited to be here to presenting to you about how exactly the Canucks Autism Network can expand program capacity to reach new people and continue impacting more families. Now we realize that this question is quite hefty, so we've broken down into 3 key components based on some of the main challenges that you're currently facing. We named these 3 components building our core, building our home, and building our community. And within each of these 3 sections, we're going to be answering a few key questions. First of all, under building our core, how is the Canucks Autism Network going to raise that additional funding to support these new programs? Secondly, in terms of building our home, how are we going to be how are we going to be looking into new facilities to actually host our growing spectrum of programs? And third, in terms of building our community, we're going to look at how we're going to be attracting these new staff and volunteer to actually support the programs that you're going to be running in the long term. And as Jules and Andrea are presenting these sections, they're going to be looking at some of the issues, our recommendations, and also our implementation plan. And finally, I'll conclude with looking at our timeline and some of the risks that we've identified within our strategies. Before diving into what our recommendations or what our situations look like, however, I just want to take a quick look at what your current state looks like and where we're trying to bring you, and why it's so important that we're structuring our presentation this way. So currently we see that the Canucks Autism Network is doing a great job. You've engaged over 2,000 members you're currently supporting within this autism community. But where we see within the BC scope is that there's 16,000 people that you've identified that can fall on this autism spectrum. And we think that there's such a great opportunity to impact and connect with so many more of these people. Because as we mentioned earlier, everyone was born to shine, and these people are too. So what we see within there is that great opportunity, but we also see some key barriers that you've identified for us today. The first is that lack of funding. We don't see that currently you have that sustainable source of long-term funding to actually support a lot of the program expansion plans that you currently have in place. Second, we see that currently you're facing issues in terms of actually attracting a lot of these new staff and volunteers to actually come in and support these programs in terms of how you're expanding moving forward. And third, we see that you're currently facing barriers in terms of finding new facilities to actually host a lot of these new programs that you want to take place. So what we see within there is that you have a lot of waitlisted members, a lot of people that you could potentially impact that are currently being put on the wait list. But we want to quickly get these people off the wait list and into your program so that they can have a positive impact in their lives. What we also see is that you have this restricted capacity to touch these additional lives. Ultimately, what we're talking about here today, the conversation won't end today. The conversation that we're having right now is about making these families happy, making a happier family, making these youth on the autism spectrum happier. We find that there's a great opportunity to make so much impact in so many different lives, and this conversation is one that's going to take place moving forward, not only for these youth, but the youth of the future. And we're so excited to have Jules and Andrea dive into their sections about how we can make this happen.
So diving deep, what we see is that the Canucks Autism Network just this past year has hosted over 500 programs. 500 of these programs, which have involved over 2,000 youth on the autism spectrum, by giving them an opportunity to engage with recreational and sport activities, and ultimately changing the way that they're actually engaging with their communities. But what we also see is that the revenues that the Canucks Autism Network has had has actually decreased by approximately 3% in the past year. What does this actually mean? It means that if this trend actually continues to happen, the number of programs that the Canucks Autism Network will be able to host will decrease, which will ultimately decrease the amount of youth that you're actually able to support with these recreational and sport programs. Moving forward, this is something that we want to change. However, what we see moving forward is that there's 2 perceptual barriers to getting people into actually donating and increasing the amount of funding that the Canucks Autism Network is actually going to receive. The first perceptual barrier is regarding the Canucks Autism Network and the perception that it's actually fully funded by the Vancouver Canucks. what we see in the actual reality is that it's not actually funded by the Vancouver Canucks, and not a lot of people actually know this, which inhibits them from actually donating, feeling that that there is no way for them to actually create impact by donating to the Canucks Autism Network. The second barrier that we see is that there's so many ways to engage with impact. There's so many ways for these individual donors to try to create an impact because there's so many not-for-profits. There's so many causes that they can be attached to, and that there's no actual way, and there's not a lot of value for them to actually engage with the Canucks Autism Network unless they have a reason to do so. So moving forward, in order to support more programs and to impact more youth on the autism spectrum by providing sports and recreational programs, the Canucks Autism Network needs to find a sustainable way to actually grow and build their funding sources in order to do and create more of this impact. To do this, we've identified 3 main alternatives that we can actually pursue to go forward with this. The first is by targeting individual donors. The second is by focusing more on corporate donors. And lastly, by actually creating a social enterprise to fund and support your operations and those programs moving forward. We actually evaluated these 3 alternatives 2 ways. The first thing that we looked at was scalability. How can we actually expand, and what is the potential to expand these revenue sources so that you're able to contribute a larger percentage of those revenues towards these programs? The second thing that we realized was that the Canucks Autism Network has constrained resources, in the sense that you guys are very, very busy. We want to make sure that our recommendation moving forward utilizes as little resources as possible so that you're actually able to implement and create these revenues. With that said, we've identified individual donors as the recommendation moving forward for 2 main reasons. The first reason is that the individual donor population is a population that that's actually untapped as a result of that first perceptual barrier that I mentioned. The second reason is because the individual donors are something that you can easily connect to by attaching the Vancouver Canucks brand, allowing you to easily connect with them and grow that donor base easily. So now diving deeper into our recommendation, we recommend the We Can campaign. And this campaign has 2 main parts. The first part is a social media awareness and impact campaign where you're going to be posting infographics and posts on 3 main channels: Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And through these channels, what you're really going to be promoting is the impact and also awareness in these channels to eliminate that first perceptual barrier that we identified. The way that we're going to do this is through Did-you-know snippets and other creative posts. The second part of the We Can campaign is by actually choosing a Vancouver Canucks member, like Pedersen or Horvat, to actually be a part of the promotions and also the events that are surrounding the Canucks Autism Network to engage more of the donor base that we've targeted. So we want to target the British Columbia hockey community. The reason why we're doing this is because what we notice is that they love hockey and they want to share that sport, and they want to share the sport of hockey with everyone in the community. We realize that this is enough of a value proposition for them to actually want to give and want to actually spread their sport and share their love for it by actually donating to these programs and showing that these programs can actually create more and more players for hockey and create a bigger hockey community. In terms of how we're actually going to implement this, in Facebook, what we want to do is we want to drive awareness and also impact. The way we're going to do this is through infographics and posts like, did you know that 1 in 51 people are identified to have ASD? Secondly, we want to use Instagram and use the ambassador that we got from the NHL to actually highlight some of the impacts that they've created, but also highlight some of the parts of their lives where they're actually engaging with the Canucks Autism Network to, again, create more of that interest, but also to drive how much impact they're creating. And finally, we want to have semi-annual YouTube videos which capture the impact that the Canucks Autism Network have supported over 2,000 youth by, again, providing recreational sports and also other activities. All of these 3 channels are going to funnel down into the Canucks Autism website where they can have 3 main options. The first is to have an individual donation, which is a one-time thing, or maybe even have a sustainable donation in the form of microgiving. And third, if they don't want to donate any money, why not engage them and get them involved in some of the programs that you're hosting so you build that constant pipeline of not only donations, but also staff and volunteers. And finally, we want to have a progress tracker at the end of the year to show how much impact, and that's a piece that we're actually going to be distributing throughout those channels to, again, communicate how much impact is being made with these donor dollars to all of your donor base to keep them retained year over year.
So now that we've talked a little bit about how we're going to obtain funding moving forward, we really want to take a step back and think about how exactly we're going to expand these programs and what kind of facilities we can look into in terms of expanding these programs moving forward. So if we take a look right now at what your organizer is doing, we recognize that about 10% of your program costs are allocated to these facility rentals, and we also recognize that because of this, it's increasingly difficult and costly to utilize these spaces. As well, you are tapping into opportunities such as in-kind donations to utilize spaces that are not being used, but these times are often constricting because they're often, late in the day or during programming hours where kids on the autism spectrum are not able to use them. And so we see that the Canucks Autism Network really needs to look into spaces that offer timing that is relevant and applicable to your programs that you're currently offering. And so we looked at 3 different alternatives to expand your program capacity. First off, we evaluated potentially building a venue itself to host your own programming, to host these swim clubs, these skate opportunities, and these music programs. But we see that in different areas of BC, there's different waitlist times and different programs that demand different number of students. And so we see that building a venue off the bat is not what we should look into currently until more programming and a demand has been established. And so moving forward, we looked into partnering potentially with universities as well as partnering with community centers. And we evaluated these using 3 different criteria. So firstly, we looked at the attractiveness of hours available for these programming, the availability of resources such as gym space, swimming pool capacity, as well as skating rinks, as well as the proximity to the beneficiaries. So is the location accessible to all of the participants that want to be attending these programs? And so specifically looking into partnering with universities, we recognize that it's not as attractive for hours as university teams and sports will often be using these facilities after school programming, so that conflicts with the current debate and debacle with using facility hours, as well as the proximity to members. Universities are often segregated in other parts of BC, so this may make it difficult for students to participate in these programs. And so then we looked at partnering with community centers, and we recognized that within BC, there are so many community centers that are offering spaces to develop communities. And we see that in looking in this further, that they have the resources available that we're looking for, as well as the proximity to location is of very close to these members. And so moving forward, we recognize that partnering with these community centers is the best bet moving forward. And so how we recommend looking into this is forming a contract initially with the municipalities themselves versus individual community centers. We recognize that there are often unoccupied spaces within these community centers, and that these are in areas of high demand within the community. And why this actually works for community centers is that we see that they're already offering opportunities for these members of these communities, as well as their vision of providing opportunities for all kids of all ages and all areas is of value to them. As well, we see that there's an opportunity to develop sustainable relationships moving forward to help create more programming moving forward. And how we see the implementation of this going is first looking into serving the interest within the communities. We recognize that areas such as Burnaby, Port Coquitlam, and Vancouver are of high demand. And so contacting areas such as the City of Vancouver and saying, there are so many people within your community that haven't been tapped in and who are looking for opportunities to get their kids into programming, and that our organization, the Canucks Autism Network, is providing these opportunities. And what better way to do so than giving us the opportunity to utilize your space that's not already being occupied. And by connecting with this municipal park boards, we see that, like I mentioned before, the real messaging that we want to communicate is that you're providing opportunities to additional members of your community. And then after following that, we see that establishing a short-term contract is a feasible opportunity to do, and to create a 2-year outline of what exact programs are being offered and what impact is being created within the community. And now that we've established how we're going to establish our home, We want to see how we're going to expand the community and really engage more people to be involved within the Canucks Autism Network. And so what we see is that there's a growing opportunity for people to volunteer within BC. And as well, there are 25 other organizations who are offering opportunities for people with developing disabilities. And this really creates a barrier for people who are looking for volunteer opportunities because they're seeing what will incentivize me to volunteer at the Canucks Autism Network versus other organizations. And we see that to attract more staff and volunteers, the Canucks Autism Network really needs to communicate this value proposition that they're including to the community. And so if we look at Harry, for example, Harry is a university student who really cares about giving back to the community and has an interest in sports such as hockey and soccer. And the real reason why he feels passionate about volunteering is that he really wants to feel connected to the cause when volunteering for our organization. And so in order to target Harry, what we propose is targeting these high school students and university students who really have the potential to grow with your organization and become long-term supporters of the Canucks Autism Network. And for this, we recommend creating this CAN Volunteer Network to create a community within your volunteer and staff base, and providing membership opportunities as well as opportunities to connect with, as Jules mentioned, players of the Canucks team such as Horvat and Pedersen to reinstill that incentive of volunteering with the Canucks Autism Network, and in the end, to provide this network. And how we see this being implemented is emailing student engagement offices within BC. There are numerous universities and high schools that can be targeted, and the message we want to communicate is that there are valuable volunteer opportunities to grow in and skills to develop, as well as opportunities to meet these Canucks members. And we see that by sending out email newsletters monthly highlighting these opportunities, especially in times where high school students and university students are looking for opportunities, such as in the summertime and the fall, we see that you can increase participation by about 6,000.
So before I dive into what the cost and impacts look like overall, I just want to quickly recap on what Jules and Andrea have talked about. In terms of the first issue of funding, what we looked at is creating that We Can campaign so that we're able to drive up not only awareness, but also those additional donations back to our own webpage. In terms of what Andrea talked about, in terms of finding a new home and building that community, we're looking at new ways of attracting and incentivizing these new staff and volunteers through these incentives, such as giving them the opportunities to meet these ambassadors, these hockey players, and also to get involved with that community. And in terms of building a home, we're looking at finding that community center and partnering with these municipal boards in order to get that initial partnership so that we can have those long-term relations. But diving into some of the costs and impact that we're looking at, I want to primarily focus a lot of these costs are going to be centered around building our core. Most of these costs are going to come from these social media campaigns, such as using Facebook, the Instagram monthly blogs, and also those YouTube videos. All these costs come out to around $35,000. We're happy to dive more into it in Q&A in terms of how exactly we derive them. In terms of some of the impact that we're creating, however, what we see is that we're engaging a large portion of this community. We see that in terms of the population of BC, that's 5 million people. We forecasted just around 5% of these British Columbians loving hockey. We do anticipate that number potentially being higher, but we also see that the percentage of these people donating being around 5% as well. That comes down to around $20 on average per donation, which we forecast a total of additional 250,000 additional donations annually, and also 147 additional youth engaged. And that additional youth engaged is a number that I really want to point your attention towards, because those are the additional lives that we are impacting, the additional numbers of people that we are allowing to shine. In terms of the timeline, we forecasted it up until 2021, where approximately you wanted to see some results in terms of the end of your 2021 plan. So we see that some of the key dates that I do want to highlight is those Instagram blogs. We are going to have it running through all the way until the end. And even going forward, we do see this as something that we can continuously use to engage the community. In terms of some other dates, such as contacting the municipality, we want to get that engaged right away, and we're going to have this continuing through in the later years as well, because we do want to continue fostering these new opportunities to partner with new community centers within the community. In terms of risks, one of the key risks I want to focus on is that potentially these community centers might lack the actual capacity. And that's why we're really proposing partnering with these municipal boards, because we think that they will have the greatest insights into where these space abilities actually lie. As a contingency, we can find alternative private locations to actually partner with. So today we really talked about how we can let these kids be born to shine. But now it's time for your organization to shine. And we're so excited to open the floor for questions.
You talked about the creation of a grassroots fundraising campaign, how we can generate funds, I think, to $250,000. We see lots of other nonprofits in BC generating 6 to 7 figure gifts on a regular basis from major gift donors. How do you see this fundraising campaign translate into larger gifts down the road?
So what we initially wanted to target with this grassroots campaign was the individual donor, because what we see with the individual donor compared to other types of donor groups is that they're very sustainable, and for the Canucks Autism Network, it's largely untapped. So moving this into the long term, we see that they will be a sustainable source that will keep ensuring that the Canucks Autism Network has enough of those funds to continue having a greater impact year over year. But to answer the second part of your question on how this can transition into larger donors, some of the numbers that we actually forecasted were very conservative. Like Stanley mentioned, only 5% of the hockey population. We believe that there's also opportunities to engage with these further through the donor retention strategies that we actually implemented. For example, the donor video that we're hosting semi-annually, by impacting them and showing them the impact they create, maybe they actually want to give more to the Canucks Autism Network. And not only does it create that initial base that I was talking about earlier, but it provides that platform for them to want to give more in the future.
My question is, you identified 2 specific barriers to donating early in your presentation. So from your recommendation, what is it that you shared with us that you feel will mitigate those barriers?
So in terms of the 2 barriers, one of them was definitely the fact that there's a lot of association that the Canucks currently supports most of the CAN. But what we wanted to show within a lot of these impact reports and these infographics is actually where a lot of our donation sources are coming from in a clear and visual way, so that people within the community can see that we aren't getting actually all of our funding from the Canucks, and there's so many other avenues where these donations can come in, so that they can feel incentivized to support in other ways other than just thinking that the Canucks are currently supporting fully. The other barrier that we outlined was that these people don't feel incentivized. They see that there's a lot of other charities or opportunities to donate to, and that's where we really wanted to create that emotional connection by having these connections with these ambassadors, having these monthly videos, having these vlogs, to really create that piece of empathy, because we feel that these are great opportunities for people to not only see the numbers of where they're donating, but also visually to sort of see videos of these kids and how their lives were impacted, and we feel that that creates a lot more of a stronger emotional attachment as well, and that's how we're seeking to overcome those barriers.
Just a question about using the high school students. What do you see as a necessary investment on our part in order to make sure that the high school students are functioning efficiently?
Well, we see that your organization already has training programs in place to communicate exactly what these volunteers are going to be doing, and so we see that with these high school students coming in, potentially revamping some of these volunteer manuals to really outline explicitly what is expected from these high school students, and really to tie it back into really what your organization does. It provides kids the opportunity to be kids, and to showcase this to these high school students and say, you're really providing this opportunity that you had when you were younger, to give this opportunity to other people who may not have it